Hey, and welcome to the highlights of episode number 199 with Kate Northrup. Some of my favorite parts of this episode were when she talks about how to rewrite your money story and why falling in love with money is the best financial decision that you can ever make. I also loved it when she shared her data-driven tips on how to do less, but achieve more in your business and at home. I also loved it when she shares the different cycles that women experience in the month and how to use them to your advantage to create whatever your heart desires. But there is so much more wisdom and inspiration that you get in the full episode. So, to listen to the full podcast and get all the info in the show notes, head on over to melissaambrosini.com/199 right now. Welcome, Kate. I'm so excited to have you on the show. But first, before we dive into your amazing books and all of the beautiful work that you're doing in the world, can you tell us your story and how you got to where you are today doing the amazing work that you and your husband do for women all over the world?
Absolutely. So I actually got started in business very young. I really started in direct sales actually when I was in high school. But then in 2010, I started a blog because I wanted to have a creative outlet and only later realized that that could be a business. And I wrote my first book, Money, a Love Story, and that did really well, except for the problem was that quite shortly after it came out, I didn't really have anything further to say on money. So at the time, I felt quite creatively dried up. And I felt like everyone else who was in my circle, who had had books come out around the same time and felt like contemporaries, were moving ahead, and I was not. And I felt like I sucked. And then, during that period of time, I ended up getting married. I had a baby. And during my pregnancy with my first child, Penelope, I was so tired. I meet women all the time who are like, I loved being pregnant. And I am not one of those women. I just did not. I just was like, it's a lot. So I was so exhausted and I needed to, in order to just barely function, I was sleeping like 10 or 11 hours at night and taking 3-hour naps. I mean, it was ridiculous. And I cut my work hours like in half. But my husband and I run our own company. We were about to have a kid. We don't have in the United States any paid parental leave, and we didn't have a company paying maternity or paternity leave. So we needed to get the same results income wise with less than half the amount of work. And then I had Penelope, and that was a somewhat traumatic experience for me. And honestly, becoming a mother was just so shocking. And it was that first year was the hardest year of my life. Penelope was sick. She was not a sleeper. We only had 10 hours of childcare a week. And yet we sat down the first year after she was born, and we had made the same amount of money as we had in years prior when we had been working twice as much. And so I just thought to myself, well, what the heck was I doing all of those years? Putting in all those hours if I could have gotten the same results in half the amount of time. So that's why I wrote this book.
Why is it so important that we fall in love with money and we reevaluate our relationship with money? And how do we do that?
Yes. So it is so important because we have to use money every day. And so it's not one of those things like if you have a tumultuous relationship with drugs or alcohol, you can just, I understand it is not easy, but you can stop using them. Whereas money, we live in a society where you need money. And money is this thing that we sort of all agreed to participate in. And the thing is, we as humans, we made it up. It really doesn't exist. And it's just a stand-in. It's a symbol for value, for what we value. And so we really need to, for me and for the people I've worked with, we've had over 5,000 graduates of our Money Love course. It's about creating a loving relationship with our money so that it is no longer a source of stress and angst, but instead a source of freedom and joy and possibilities. So because otherwise it just causes so much stress and friction every single day, all day long.
I know. What do you do though if someone listening is having these light bulb moments, these realizations, and they're willing and they're open and they're ready and they do the work, but their partner is just so closed, not interested, almost, turns a blind eye to it? What have you seen work? What are some strategies, or is there anything that you can do?
I really think there's always something we can do. And I think the best thing that we can do is do our own work. Because 9 times out of 10, when we are mad at somebody else for being a certain way, it's because we are that way. And I do believe that we attract our partners because they have, their assignments, because we have big lessons to learn together. And so the number one thing is to stay in your own lane, do your own work, and hopefully through our own behavior, inspire the other person to shift or shift our side of the relationship. Because when we shift our own behavior, the relationship can't actually stay the same. So something also changes on the other side. It has to.
Now, let's change gears a little bit because your second book, which I tore through, by the way, it was amazing. So thank you so much for sending that to me. So tell us about how can, people listening be like, okay, how do I do less but still achieve what I want to achieve and still make, amazing money? How can we actually do that? And why is it so important?
Well, it's so important. I'll start with why it's so important, and then I'll tell you how. It's so important because at the end of our lives, none of us will sit on our deathbed and wish we had gotten more done. Our obsession with productivity as a culture is completely missing the mark. I know for sure that year I was pregnant with my first, and that first year of motherhood, the reason we were able to make just as much money as previous years when I was working twice as much is because I got laser focused, because I had such limited time and energy and bandwidth. And I was so profoundly sleep deprived that I just got so focused on what needed to happen in a short period of time. And I didn't even have time or energy to think about it. And so, how I apply this now when my life isn't quite as intense, is the 80-20 rule. Number one, I just live and breathe this. And I'm sure that you apply this in your business as well, Melissa. It's to know that really and truly 80% of our results come from 20% of our actions. Write on a piece of paper, draw a line down the middle, and on one side, on the left-hand side, write out the tasks that you do on a weekly basis in your job or in your business. And on the right-hand side, write out your biggest career wins to date. And then draw a line from the biggest career wins to date directly to the tasks on the left that actually resulted in those big wins. And you will very quickly have a list on the left-hand side of your 20% that leads to 80% of the results. And then over time, the idea is to let more and more of the rest of the items go and focus more and more of your precious time and energy on that 20%. I mean, there are many more ideas in the book. That's not the only one, but really it's like, to me, the 80-20 rule is the 80-20 of doing less. It's like, if you just did that, you would get so many results.
And you talk about how men and women experience time differently and how we can access our productivity blueprint. So can you talk a little bit about that?
Absolutely. So I was so fascinated to learn this from Elisa Vitti, who wrote Woman Code. And it's so fascinating that so hormonally speaking, men's hormones cycle every 28 days. I'm sorry, that is incorrect. Men's hormones cycle every 24 hours. Women's hormones cycle every 28 days. Now, this makes a lot of sense because we live in a patriarchy that is focused on the experience of living in a male body. And so all of our time and all of our time management systems and all of, the corporate world and everything is set up, of course, for a 24-hour cycle. And the idea is you're supposed to reset and be exactly the same as you were the day before, if not more energized and more productive, right? And more like get out there and hustle. But women, we are actually cyclical in a very predictable way. But instead of over 24 hours, we have these same four energy phases as a man has within the course of a day, but we have them over 28 days. And what's so important to know about that is that as women, we ourselves have downloaded this idea that there's something wrong with our bodies because they're unpredictable or we're all over the place or women act crazy when they're having their period or oh you must be having your period, like you don't actually feel that way, right? There's so much discrediting of the female experience. And what's so important to know is that we have these four energetic phases over the course of a month. So we are lunar creatures.
So, how does that apply to our working style and getting things done? How does that apply?
Yeah, so I think it's really important to know what these four energetic phases are. So if you're tracking the moon or your menstrual cycle, I'll just kind of lay out what the phases are. There's the menstrual part of your cycle when you're bleeding, and that is the same energy as the new moon. And that's the time when it's a great time for rest and reflection. And your brain will actually be the most wired for connectivity between the left hemisphere and the right hemisphere. And your intuition will be the strongest as a result of that. So you'll actually get your most intuitive information and your most spot on wisdom during that time. Then there's the follicular phase. It's the same energy as the waxing moon, when the moon is moving from new to full. And that energy is really kind of springtime energy. It's the energy of fresh starts and new beginnings and brainstorming and initiating things. And then the next phase is ovulation or the full moon, same energy. That's the time of peak fertility and cross fertilization and peak receptivity. It's a time when you really want to be out there, like you really feel like going to a cocktail party. You're the most verbally communicative, verbally fluent during this time, the best communicator. And you're also the most magnetic to your desires, whether that's literally, to get pregnant or to metaphorically get pregnant, because we all metaphorically are looking to get pregnant with something. Okay, just one more, which is the luteal phase in your menstrual cycle, or it's like an autumn energy. It's the waning moon, and it's really a turning within time. It's a time to bring things to completion. Culturally, we have trouble bringing things to an end. We think that things ending means that they failed somehow, but there are things that just only have a timeline of however long they have. So as a culture, we kind of skip over this phase, this energy of completion and tuning and turning within. But it's a really important energy. And to know that we will go through all of these during a month. But I really like to look at projects from these four energetic signatures as well, to know that your projects, whether it's writing a book, launching a podcast, coming up with some sort of new program, those projects will also have these four energetic signatures.
That's why that downtime, that reflection is so
Yeah.
important. I love this and it's so fascinating. But what if you don't bleed on the new moon and you bleed on the full moon? How does that then work?
So I found out this is really cool, because if you follow the moon and if you're kind of into spirituality, you may know that when women are not exposed to artificial light, they do tend to bleed on the new moon. However, in community. However, I found out that back in the day when there was not artificial light, there was a group of women, a smaller group of women that would bleed on the full moon, because traditionally women who were bleeding, they rested, right? Because that's what our bodies feel like doing. So believe it or not, they actually did that. And then the women who were bleeding on the full moon were then able to take care of the women who were bleeding on the new moon, and then vice versa. So there was always someone there to nurture, always someone there to care, because nature is so genius it takes care of everyone and it takes care of everything. And our bodies are wired to do that. But if you are, that was just a side note, I think it's interesting. But if you are bleeding on the full moon, if you have your period on the full moon instead of the new moon, it just means it's a different energy of it. And so I like to go with body first. So I follow what my body is doing first, and then I kind of add in the flavor of the moon. But for some women who have irregular periods or are pregnant or nursing or, are past menopause, whatever, the moon is such a great thing to track in terms of cross referencing our energetic patterns with the moon, because the moon is so predictable, right? I mean, you could look out at a lunar calendar for 50 years in the future. So that's kind of a nice thing to track against if you don't have a regular cycle to follow.
Yeah, wow. And how was it having that, your direct sales, your network marketing business? Like, how did that feel for you, having that security there whilst you embarked on this pregnancy journey?
Well, it felt so good. I mean, I had worked on that for, let's see, when I got pregnant, I was 32. So I had been growing that for 14 years, really with the intention of setting myself up for that moment financially. And we still needed to work on it. It wasn't like it just came in completely automatically, but it felt great to have that foundation, at least, that we could grow from and know that, if worst case scenario, we really couldn't work, that we might have needed to back down our lifestyle some, but we could have made that work financially, and taken a full break for a little while. We didn't end up doing that. Well, I took 3 months off with Penelope, but it was made that initial year a lot easier, and I'm grateful for it.
That's the beautiful thing about network marketing.
Yeah. Yeah.
How has motherhood changed you?
Oh, it has just given me so much compassion for humanity. Just like I thought I was going to be somebody who, just because I wanted to be a mom my whole life, I just sort of assumed it would be easy for me. And yet, suddenly being in charge of keeping this little person alive, and then with the hormonal changes and just the massive identity shifts, and I was just so shocked by how exhausted I was, how my life had shifted so dramatically overnight. And I didn't realize how much I loved having my freedom. And so I think that motherhood is just it really sounds dramatic, but it's really broken me down in the best of ways. I think that things that are very, very difficult and break us down, they make us softer and in many ways more resilient. Like I feel like I am just a much softer, but at the same time, stronger person. And I love that because there's this common experience of bringing humans into the world or shepherding them through the world. I feel like I can relate to almost everybody on a level that is so beautiful. I can connect with other people, especially mothers, but really everybody, because birth for sure, and then being a mother has just put me in touch a little bit more with the heartbeat of what being human is all about. And I think I wasn't quite as connected to that before.
That's so beautiful. How important do you think it is that for me, our soul sister friendships, our women, you said, being with women really lights you up. How important is it for you that you do that? Is it something that you consciously do on a weekly basis? Is it something, now that you've got two children, like how do you make sure that you are getting your soul sisterhood top up in your life? Like, is it something that you consciously schedule, or are you a little bit more relaxed and when it happens, it happens?
It's a top priority for me. So I will make sure that at least once a week, I'm at least having a Skype date with a girlfriend or a phone call or a coffee date or a walk or something. So my life is full. I do have the kids, so when I'm not working, I am mostly with the kids. But if it's that I get a babysitter and Mike goes out for the night by himself and I go out with girlfriends or whatever it is, it's a top priority for me. And a lot of times I'll voice memo back and forth with my girlfriends. So even if we're not like talking in real time, we're pretty connected on a weekly basis anyway. And that's incredibly nourishing because I can listen to the voice memos, on my way to pick the girls up at school. Like I kind of listen to voice memos from my girlfriends like I listen to podcasts.